Now that we are familiar with work area and workspaces here in Photoshop, let's learn a little bit about the core of Photoshop and images. So we know that Photoshop is designed for editing, manipulating images and graphics, but really at its core, all Photoshop is a program that manipulates light. For an example, as you're watching this video, your computer is receiving a ton of data from YouTube, and it supplies that data to your computer. Your computer then shines that information on your laptop, and through a series of beams of light, which interpret the data that's being sent. And that's what you see, and you see it in terms of pixels. And pixels are dots per square inch that full of color within a specified range that tell you about that information. So to give you an example, I'm going to zoom into this image. And we're going to zoom into the bricks, and I'll do it really slowly so you can start to see that transformation. Now we've switched to pixel view. I'm going to keep zooming in, and there we go. So if you look at all of these squares on your screen, they are all pixels, and each of those pixels is a solid color, and each of those solid colors basically make up the image. So if we were looking at this as a full-sized image, then this would be considered a low-resolution picture. But that's because we're zoomed into it. But you can see at a lower range, there's really not much to see. You can't really make out that there's an image here. But for higher resolution images, the more pixels that we pack into that space that we see on our monitor, the more of an image that we get. So obviously the higher the pixels, the better the image, and this is what we have. And that's how Photoshop will manipulate those each individual pixels, either changing the color or how many are within that predefined space to give you an object. And that's really what an image is on your computer. So when it comes to taking photographs that you're going to take either for the web or for print, usually the lower the pixels for web, 72 dpi, and for print 300 dpi, or resolution, I should say. But then the difference there is JPEG versus RAW or camera raw format. Camera raw will either be .raw or a .dng file format. There's a couple other formats, but those are the two typical ones. And a RAW file taken by typical or most SLR, like Nikon SLRs or Canon, some point and shoots might support RAW file format. But the benefit to RAW file format is that the image itself contains a lot of information about what's going on in the image. So from Adobe Bridge, if I double click on a RAW file for an example, here's a RAW file, and I opened it up. I've got this little slider over here that kind of shows me, you can see this graph that represents our light and dark. Here's our light and dark, and if I click on it, you'll notice that all the dark, real dark, that would otherwise appear to be absolute black in an image are highlighted here. If I click here, we don't really have a whole lot of light images. But if I come down here and I slide this fill light slider, start sliding it to the right hand side, we'll see that this raw image actually contains a lot more information within those dark areas. Now if this was a native JPEG file, we would not have been able to recover those highlights because they would have been considered absolute black. So it would have tried to replace it with white, and you wouldn't have had the texture details that we have here. So that's the benefit of Camera Raw, is all the information that it stores within the image itself. Within Camera Raw too, it should probably talk about destructive versus non-destructive editing. Whenever you apply a edit within Camera Raw, you're applying a global edit, which makes that apply to the entire image. And it's non-destructive, meaning at any time you can undo the changes that you did. You can reopen that after you've saved it, undo all the changes, or revert back to the original. Whereas local editing, like here in Photoshop, if I am on, let me create a new layer here, layer 1, and let's say I grab my smudge tool and I create a smudge to this image, and then I go back through and I save this image and reopen it, well, this is what I'm going to see when I open up my page. That's because I've applied destructive editing to this image. I've physically altered the pixels within that image permanently. And I would have a heck of a time going back through and trying to fix what I've done here. So, overall view of what Photoshop is, what images are. In our next lesson, we're going to take a deeper dive into Camera Raw and talk more about global versus local editing.